All right, hey class. So today's video is going to be just kind of a walkthrough of the student sample for Project 3A, the Lit Review, that I posted under week 8. And what I want to do is I want to walk you through kind of the basic kind of broad strokes of the assignment so that you get a feel for what this thing actually looks like. But then I also want to spend a good amount of time talking about the introduction, which is what I'm going to ask you guys to draft for this weekend. And so let's go ahead and pull it up and we'll take a look. All right, so let's go down here, week 8. Okay, here we go. Oops. All right, and so what you're going to see in a minute is a really good example of what a literature review should be doing, what it should look like. And so we can talk about the kind of purposes behind the literature review actually after we've had a chance to look at it. And so as you can see here, we've got a clear title page that's going to present us with the overarching kind of research question that the student used to guide the investigation into Project 2, into Project 3, and then used to make an argument in Project 4. And so that's something that I want you to do. So on your front page, you'll have something like this, which is, kind of your driving research question. And so let's take a look here. So we get the idea that we're looking at the kind of field of jazz and jazz musicians, and specifically we're looking at women in jazz. And so that is going to be the kind of guiding thread that we see throughout. So let's take a look here at just kind of the essay as a whole, and then we'll come down and look at some specific pieces. Now what you'll notice is we have, throughout the introduction here, we have kind of the statement of interest, which is something that I'm asking you guys to think about in Project 3B as well, that presentation, that, idea of why are you interested in this community? And so we have this here as a jazz musician myself. And so once we get a sense of why this person's interested, what you'll notice as you read this on your own is that we have a lot of these kind of citations peppered in around the literature review. Now, what I want to stress is that your goal here is to take the sources that you found so far and to show how they're relating to one conversation, how they're all speaking as part of a conversation. And so let's take a look here. If we go down, we can see that we've got the introduction here giving us that kind of background information. And then what this person has done is they've divided their research into some key categories, all relating to women in the field. And so when this person was doing research in the library, what they found was their sources were coming at this question of women's impact on jazz in several key ways. So one of them was historical. What has historically women's role been in jazz? And so then we get a discussion of that. And then we come down here and we see some of the sources that this person found were talking about why women aren't as involved in jazz as men. And so again, we've got different kinds of or different sources focused on different things, one on history, one on participation. But they're all still talking about women in jazz. And so you can start to see how even though your sources are talking about different things, they're still starting to have the same conversation. So women in jazz. So we've got history, we've got contribution or participation, and then we come down here and we see more factors specifically related to psychology, right? So this person, when they were doing research, found some sources dealing with psychology and how that might contribute to the kind of gender disparities that he or she saw when looking at this community. So if we come down a little bit further, we have this conclusion that kind of ties everything together to make some kind of sort of statement or assessment, or just some sort of reflection about the process of doing this literature review. And so now that we've had a chance to look at the kind of broad strokes, let's go back for a minute. And so what I want to stress to you is that as you're doing this research, as you are investigating the research questions that you've come up with so far, or maybe the one kind of guiding research question, what you're going to find is you're going to find exactly what this person found. You're going to find sources that are all dealing with the same topic, but in different ways. And so in this case, we found sources all talking about women in jazz, but they're all talking either about history or participation or psychology, right? And so rather than trying to talk about how a historical background of jazz relates to current psychological, uh, studies relating to gender in music or whatever, what they've instead done is they've grouped similar sources together to show how those are in conversation with each other. And then by kind of doing that and sectioning it off like that, we can see how even though they're talking about different things, they're all still coming at this question in similar ways. And that's something that you should be thinking about too, is how do your sources relate to each other? But then how can you effectively group them together? And so that's one of the things that you're going to want to pay attention to is, do you see your sources fitting into some categories or some different sections? And that would be a really useful way to think about organizing your research. So let's take a look at the introduction here. Now I'm going to read this through a little bit. And so if you've already read this through, just kind of bear with me here. But let's pay attention to some of the moves this person is doing in the introduction, because this is what I'm going to ask you guys to do in your introductions. So jazz, a musical genre characterized by syncopation, improvisation, distinctive harmonies, is primarily a male-dominated field. Now I want to stop here for a second, because what this person has just done in the first sentence is identified the community that we're going to be talking about, given us a definition of that community, but then also brought in some research. Now obviously you don't have to bring in a source on your first sentence. But the idea here is that instead of just kind of manhandling or manufacturing some sort of setup for a quote, like jazz is this, as so-and-so says in this text, blah, 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 it's okay to kind of do this fluid peppering in of sources and have these references just in here. And so this is a good way to kind of show research without having to say, author A says this, author B says this. It's okay to kind of put them in this kind of your own kind of conversational tone. Now, I want to pause also to say that the way you cite these things depends on the community that you're engaging with. So whether you do footnotes, whether you do kind of an APA style citation or an MLA style citation, it's completely dependent on what your field uses. So pay attention to what your articles are doing and try to mirror that citation style. Okay. So innovated by men, developed and performed in the male-exclusive environment of nightclubs and approached with an overall masculine aggressiveness, the field of jazz has managed to maintain an overall male dominance while ignoring the presence of female influence. Even books written regarding jazz history emphasize the influence of men. Although women are present, the proportion of men is highly unequal. Okay, so we've got this really good opening paragraph. It's giving us a sense of the community as well as the sense of the problem that this person was interested in when they started to research. So this person was really curious about women's role, or maybe the way that women have been underrepresented in jazz. And so what we see here is a really focused, really well-organized opening paragraph that's doing a lot of work. So let's think about it. It's giving us a definition of the community. It's using some research to support those definitions. And it's also identifying the kind of problem related to the research question that we have up here. And so when you come into your introductions that you'll be kind of working on this week, I want you to think about how you can do those things. Try to make sure your introduction is doing work for you. So the things that we want to think about in an introduction are identifying the topic, identifying the kind of main problem that you'll be working with. And so those are the kind of two key roles that we want to do. And so when we get to the bottom here, we'll talk more about what the introduction should do. So let's move on. As a jazz musician myself, good. Now we have the good personal interest. I've played in many related settings, varying from educational programs, et cetera, et cetera. In many cases, I was either ignored or badgered. The cycle of discrimination, right? And so this is giving us kind of the author's personal stake in this question, which not only addresses, why they're interested, but it's also relating to the problem. Now, you might not have this kind of personal stake in the community yet that this person does, right? In other words, you might not have faced discrimination, or you might not have been dealing with the problems that you're investigating, but you're still interested in this topic. And so why are you interested in that topic, right? So you're not a doctor yet, but you want to be, and you're really interested in one specific issue within the medical field. So just give us a sense of why you're interested in that, in that problem, or why that, of all the things you could have talked about, why is this the one that you picked? And so then we move on into kind of tying these two things together, right? The disregard for female jazz musicians has created a general negative viewpoint. So now we've moved on from the kind of what we might call this kind of statement of the problem, and we've moved on from this kind of personal interaction, and we moved into the kind of current field, right? The kind of current state of the issue as it relates to this field and why it's a problem. And so in other words, here's what the problem is, here's my personal stake in it, here's why this is important. So there's a gap where researchers fail to directly address the actual discrimination. And then this is a really important pivot. Because of this gap, so in other words, this person has looked at the research and noticed that there's not a lot of discussion about this. Because of this gap between historical views and current progress, this paper will review literature concerning the concept of women in jazz history, stereotypical views of women within the jazz community, as well as its sociocultural sense, and the resulting lack of female participation within jazz music. First, literature discussing jazz history and tradition is reviewed. The next section reviews how scholars have associated common stereotypes, and lastly, this paper will review how researchers have connected the field. So let's just do this real quick. Let's do this. Go right here. So here, the steps that we see, we have a clear outline of the purpose for this paper. What is your goal for the piece? Now, this is a comment that I made frequently in Project 2. What are your goals and objectives for this? Your goals here are to review the literature in order to understand more of the conversation, or to show the kind of current state of the conversation as it relates to the problem. So then we have down here your methods for achieving this goal. So your purpose is to review literature review. Your methods are to do this first, this second, this third, or however you want to organize it. So you might say, my purpose here is to review literature related to this problem. In order to do this, I'm going to first look at literature talking about this, then I'm going to look at literature talking about this, then I'm going to look at literature talking about this. And so what this does is not only does this give us a good understanding of the issue that we're going to be looking at in the paper, but then it gives me the reason why, the kind of so what, right? Like, and so in other words, you're telling me why I should, why this is important, why this matters. And then you're telling me how you're going to go about doing this. Now, this might seem like a weird kind of thing to do in an essay, but this is really good. This is actually best practice for a literature review, because you want your reader to understand why it is you've collected all these sources. And why it is you are looking at these sources in particular. Okay, so just to recap, what we have here in a good introduction, this is what I want you guys to do, is give us a definition of the field, right here, to give us an overall statement or description of the problem, right, that you're going to be looking at or that's driven your research. A statement of your own relation to the problem, or a statement of why you're interested in this field and this problem. And then coming down, you're going to give us your goals for the essay and how you're going to achieve those goals. So that's what I'm looking for in the introduction for your 3A. Now, what this will do, and why I'm having you guys write this so early, is because if you can get this, and if you can do this and do these moves, then you will have no problem writing your literature review. Students that run into trouble with literature reviews do so because they don't really understand the purpose of the literature review. And so if you can do these things, this will serve as a good reminder for you as you go and complete your literature review about what it is you're doing here. A lot of students often run into trouble where they try to make like different arguments or take sides with their sources, and that's not the goal. The goal is just to take all this information in, talk about how these, kind of show how these sources are related to each other. And so we can come down here and look at a quick example of that. In researching jazz history, the beginning of female discrimination, et cetera, with defining factors inhibited, Linda Dahl states, right, so we have our first statement of a source. So Linda Dahl is giving us some background information about jazz, talking about her argument. Dahl supports this idea. And then we move into some kind of other sources later on. Libsyn is one of many female jazz musicians, right? So just showing how these sources relate to each other. And so that's your goal. All right, guys, so I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I will be in touch.